The Anastasis wall painting is from a church in Cora. And what we're looking at is a painting that's actually in a funerary side chapel. So here we're looking down, the painting would be right in the center here. Although you don't see it much, you'll see it better in a moment. And this is a funerary side chapel paid for privately by a single family. So keep that in mind. It's meant for funerals when we look at it. And what we see is an apparent fascination with death and the afterlife. Perhaps after the events of 1204, the sack of Constantinople, people had lost the heart and soul of the Byzantine Empire, and they're more concerned with their own mortal remains with the afterlife than they are with their present life. We also see a shift from mosaics to fresco. Why? Because fresco is going to be faster and less expensive. A mosaic takes far more time and skill. And we know from the Romans, the Greeks, several other societies, that as things go downhill and there's less competition and there's less money for the arts, people start needing to take shortcuts. And that's one of them. We're going to move from mosaic to fresco. The subject in this case is a focus on the end of days and a hope for salvation. We see imagery of the Last Judgment. This had been restored in the 1950s, so we're seeing something much more complete than would have been there for much of its history. Jesus is dressed in white with a halo, so the white being purity, also the afterlife. The mandorla itself behind him is white, and then we have that gold halo. And this is a little bit unusual as an apse image. Usually we're seeing something such as a pancrator, Jesus as ruler of heaven, but here we're seeing something else. We're seeing the end of days. So we see Christians being brought back from death to be judged. And that's the principle going on here. We don't see judgment. What we see is the hopeful part, where people will rise again, where we will see our loved ones again. And in a funerary chapel, that makes sense. Because the funeral, the whole idea of art and ritual and everything surrounding death is there for the living, not for the dead. And so we're giving them hope that, hey, you're going to see your loved one again. Interestingly, as we look at it, we see this sort of odd pile of stuff in the foreground. A couple of doors, a lot of metal things that they assumed might last until the end of days. It's all property. What you also see is a Moor. So this black man who is tied up, and the reason he's there is he is a reflection of a North African who had not found salvation. Remember, we're at the time after the Crusades are already going on. Most of them have already happened. And so the idea of Islam as a religion that just doesn't offer salvation is going to be a fairly common theme. We also see a slave. These Moors would have been slaves in Europe at the time. Not a lot of them, but the ones that were there would have been slaves, oftentimes. And we're seeing him depicted as chattel, as stuff, as property, not as someone who would ever find salvation. So we have the combination of the religious elements, the fact that he's probably from North Africa and therefore Muslim, combined with the fact that he's a slave, and we get this depiction, this very negative depiction of a black man in art. The rest of it is, again, this very uplifting image, giving us hope that we will be once again brought together with our loved ones in the afterlife.